Let me touch you there, the lowly cowboy asked. The giant Apache woman smiled back. Ethan had been riding for hours under the blazing sun, his horse's hooves kicking up dust as they traveled across the barren desert. He had run out of water 2 hours ago, and the heat was starting to take its toll. His throat felt dry as a desert rock, and the feeling of fatigue settled heavily on his shoulders. His eyes scanned the endless stretch of sand, looking for any sign of life. He had been on this trek for too long. He wasn't a man to give up easily, but the landscape around him was unforgiving, and he was beginning to wonder if he'd ever find his way out of this desolate land. He needed to reach the nearest town, but with each passing hour, his hope dimmed a little more. The wind kicked up again, and he squinted against the gust. That's when he saw it. An odd shape in the distance, like a shadow cutting through the glare of the sun. A flicker of movement. At first he thought it was just a mirage, another cruel trick of the desert, but as he got closer he realized it wasn't. It was a person. A woman alone, out here in the wilderness? That was a rare sight, and not one to be taken lightly. He spurred his horse forward, making his way toward the figure. As he drew closer, the details began to come into focus. She stood tall, taller than any woman he had ever seen, with skin the color of deep mahogany. Her long black hair was tied back, and she wore clothes that looked like they were from another time, a blend of what he recognized as traditional Apache wear, but something about it seemed out of place. He couldn't put his finger on it. Her eyes, dark as night, locked onto his as he drew near, and for a moment neither of them moved. There was a quiet stillness in the air, broken only by the wind and the sound of Ethan's horse's hooves. "You look like you've been through hell," she said in a deep, steady voice, her tone calm, but with an edge to it. "What brings you out here?" He was a cowboy, used to the wild landscapes, but this felt different. It wasn't the typical desert, and this wasn't any ordinary woman. There was something almost otherworldly about her presence. "I'm just looking for water," Ethan said, his voice hoarse, "and some shade." The woman's lips curled into a slight smile, and she stepped forward, lowering a large pack from her back. She offered him a canteen, and he took it without hesitation, grateful for the life-giving liquid inside. He drank deeply, letting the cool water ease the dryness in his throat. When he lowered the canteen, she raised an eyebrow at him. "You're not from around here, are you?" Ethan hesitated. "Not exactly." The woman's smile faded slightly, and she studied him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. There was something about her gaze, like she was looking beyond him, beyond what he showed on the surface. It was unsettling, yet oddly comforting. "My name's Ethan," he said, his voice steady despite the odd feeling stirring inside him. "Tala," she replied, her voice smooth and deep, like the evening wind. "You're lucky to have found me. The desert has a way of swallowing people whole if they're not careful." Ethan shifted on his horse, suddenly feeling the weight of his situation. He had been wandering for so long, and now here was this mysterious woman who seemed to know the desert far too well. Something told him she wasn't just any traveler. She seemed out of place, her clothes, her demeanor, her confidence. "Lucky, huh?" Ethan muttered. "I wasn't expecting much, but I guess luck's a part of this game, ain't it?" Tala nodded slightly, her eyes scanning the horizon as though she was searching for something beyond the horizon. "Luck is one thing," she said, her voice low, "but there's more to this desert than meets the eye. This place holds secrets, many of them hidden deep beneath the sands." Ethan frowned, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean?" Tala's gaze shifted back to him, and she studied him with a quiet intensity. "I mean, there's more to this world than just sand and dust. There are things you wouldn't believe. I've seen them. Been to places most people wouldn't even dare to imagine. You look like you've never seen such things." Ethan's curiosity sparked, but he kept his thoughts to himself. He had met many odd characters in his travels, but this woman was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. She didn't just seem like a survivor of the desert, she seemed to understand it on a level that was far beyond ordinary. She seemed at home here. "Where are you headed?" Ethan asked, trying to steer the conversation in a more familiar direction. "I'm stranded," Tala said, her voice quiet but firm. "My ship crashed a few days ago. I'm trying to make my way to a place where I can send a signal for help." Ethan blinked, surprised by her words. "Ship? You're from one of those? Spaceships?" Tala didn't flinch at the question. Instead, she nodded. "Yes." Ethan's jaw tightened as he processed this. "A space traveler?" He had heard rumors of such things, but he had never met anyone who claimed to be from beyond the stars. His mind struggled to wrap around the idea. But as he looked at Tala, he couldn't deny that she held a presence that felt different, almost otherworldly. "Space, huh?" he muttered, rubbing his chin. "You're telling me you're from outer space?" "I am," she replied calmly, "and I need to get back." Ethan couldn't help but laugh, though it was a nervous, disbelieving chuckle. "Well, now that's a first. Never thought I'd meet someone from space out here in the desert." Tala's smile returned, this time with a hint of something more playful. "The desert is full of surprises." Ethan nodded slowly, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what she had just told him. He had heard of strange things in the desert, but this was something else entirely. "You sure you don't need any help?" Ethan asked, finally shaking himself from the haze of disbelief. "You seem like you can handle yourself, but I've got a horse and some supplies. I can help you get to wherever you're headed." "I may not need your help, but I wouldn't mind the company," she said, her tone warm, though her eyes remained distant, as if she was thinking of something far away. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he realized she wasn't just talking about the journey. There was something in her words, something unspoken, that made the desert feel just a little less lonely. And as he followed her through the shifting sands, he couldn't shake the feeling that this strange encounter was only the beginning of something far greater. Ethan and Tala rode together across the barren desert, the sun beginning to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows on the sand. The temperature had dropped slightly, but the heat of the day still lingered in the air, making each breath feel heavy. Ethan kept a steady pace, his horse trotting beside Tala's. His mind was still racing from the discovery that Tala wasn't just a desert wanderer, but a traveler from the stars. He couldn't help but glance over at her every now and then. Tala was quiet, but there was a strength about her, something he couldn't quite place. It was in the way she carried herself, the way she seemed to know the desert like the back of her hand, even though she claimed to be stranded here. There was something mysterious about her, and he was beginning to feel the pull of curiosity. Tala's eyes were fixed ahead, but there was a softness in her expression now, as if she had found a moment of peace in the chaos of the world. Ethan couldn't help but wonder how someone like her ended up in a place like this. What kind of life did she have before the crash? What was it like to come from another world, to know things that no one else did? "Do you ever miss it?" Ethan asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Miss what?" Tala asked, not looking at him, but her voice was gentle. "Your home," Ethan said, his words coming out more slowly than he intended. "Your world, your people, I mean, if you've been to space and all." Tala was quiet for a long moment. Her gaze was distant, as though she were lost in thought. Ethan waited patiently, unsure if she would answer. Finally, she spoke. "Sometimes," she said softly. "But I don't think about it too much. There's no going back. I've learned to accept that. I have a mission here, and I can't let myself be distracted by longing." Ethan nodded, feeling a strange sense of understanding. He had been on his own for years, always moving from place to place, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. He knew what it was like to be constantly on the move, but he also knew that deep down, everyone needed something to hold on to, something to remind them why they kept going. "I understand," Ethan said quietly. "I guess I've been looking for something for a long time." "Something I can call home." Tala turned her head slightly, studying him with a look of quiet intensity. "And have you found it?" Ethan shook his head, his mind swirling with thoughts he didn't know how to express. He didn't have a clear answer. What did he even mean by home? Was it a place? A person? A feeling? He had spent so much time running, working, surviving, but he'd never really stopped to think about what he was searching for. Not until now. "I don't know," Ethan said finally, his voice thoughtful. "Maybe I'm just looking for a place to belong. We all are, in our own way. But sometimes it's not the place that matters. It's the people you meet along the way." Ethan couldn't help but smile at that. For a moment it felt like Tala understood him better than anyone he had ever met. Even though she came from a different world, her words resonated with him in a way he couldn't explain. It was as if she saw something inside him that he hadn't even fully understood himself. They continued riding in silence for a while, the sounds of the horses' hooves on the sand filling the air. As they made their way deeper into the desert, Ethan couldn't help but feel that something was changing. The desert, once a place of isolation and struggle, now seemed different. It wasn't as lonely with Tala by his side. As the sky darkened, Tala guided them toward a small outcropping of rocks. She dismounted her horse and began unpacking her supplies. Ethan followed suit, unsure of what to say, but his curiosity pushing him forward. "What exactly happened to your ship?" Ethan asked, his voice low but filled with genuine interest. Was it a battle? Paused, looking at him with a guarded expression. For a moment, Ethan wondered if he had crossed a line, but then she spoke. It wasn't just a battle, she said slowly, her voice tinged with something darker. It was sabotage. Someone wanted me dead. I was on a mission to deliver something important, but they didn't want me to succeed. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He had a feeling there was much more to this than she was letting on. But something in her tone told him that now wasn't the time to press. He could see the weight of the past in her eyes, a past she wasn't ready to share just yet. I'm sorry, he said softly. I didn't mean to bring up bad memories. Tala shook her head, her expression softening. It's not your fault, Ethan. I've learned to live with it, but it doesn't change the fact that I have a job to finish. I can't afford to let anyone get in my way. Ethan understood that all too well. He had his own battles, his own struggles, but he wasn't sure if he could handle whatever Tala was up against. She wasn't just fighting for survival, she was fighting for something much bigger. As night began to fall, they set up camp in the small shelter of the rocks. Tala built a fire, and they sat together in the quiet, the warmth of the flames casting long shadows on the ground. The desert at night was a different place, calm and still, with a deep, peaceful silence that felt almost sacred. Ethan watched Tala as she tended to the fire, her face illuminated by the flickering light. There was something about her that made him feel at ease, even in the midst of everything that had happened. He wasn't sure if it was her strength, her confidence, or something else entirely. But in that moment, he realized that he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was beginning to feel something he hadn't in a long time. A sense of connection. Tala looked up from the fire, meeting his gaze. Her expression was soft, but her eyes still held the weight of everything she had experienced. She wasn't just a traveler from the stars, she was a survivor, like him. I'm glad you're here, Ethan, she said quietly. Even if this desert seems endless, it's nice to have someone to share it with. Me too, Tala. Me too. As they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, Ethan felt a sense of calm wash over him. The desert no longer seemed so lonely. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had found something he could hold on to. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't just a place he was looking for. Maybe it was the people he met along the way, like Tala, who made the journey worth it. The fire crackled and popped in the stillness of the desert night. Ethan sat across from Tala, the glow from the flames dancing across her face, highlighting the strength in her features, but also the weariness that had settled there. He had noticed it more and more in the last few days, how tired she seemed, how much she carried within herself. He shifted uncomfortably, the dry desert air making the heat of the fire almost unbearable, but it wasn't just the fire. The weight of the silence between them was heavy, as though something unspoken hung in the air, waiting for the right moment to break free. Tala seemed lost in her own thoughts, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames. Her usually stoic expression was softened now, vulnerable in a way Ethan hadn't seen before. She was no longer the warrior from another world, but just a person, like him, caught in a web of their past, struggling to survive in a world that didn't seem to care. Ethan couldn't help but feel the tension in the air. He had always been someone who kept his emotions locked up, burying them beneath layers of work and the endless road. But now as he sat across from Tala, he felt a stirring inside him, a need to say something, to reach out, to bridge the gap between them that had only been growing. The quiet was broken when Tala finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. I haven't always been like this, she said, her eyes still on the fire. I used to be different. I had a purpose, a family, a place to belong. Ethan felt a pang of sympathy, but he didn't know what to say. He had his own past, his own losses, but it didn't feel right to bring them up. This was her story, not his. What happened? He asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Tala's eyes flickered to him, her gaze sharp as if she was testing him. But she said nothing for a moment, and Ethan could see the struggle in her eyes. Then, with a long breath, she spoke again. I was part of something important, she began, her voice low, as though the words were hard to say. I was trained to lead, to protect. My people, my family, they trusted me, but I failed them. She paused, her fingers tightening around a small stone in her hand. I wasn't able to stop the betrayal, she continued, her voice filled with quiet regret. I was sent on a mission, and I trusted the wrong people. I wasn't strong enough, and I couldn't see it coming. My ship, my crew, they were all gone, taken by those I thought I could trust. I was left alone, stranded here on a planet that's not even mine. I'm still trying to fix what I broke. He wanted to offer words of comfort, but he knew it wouldn't help. He didn't have the answers she needed. All he could do was listen. He understood that much. He too had lost people, though it was different. His loss wasn't as grand, as important, but he still knew the pain of being alone, of failing to protect the people who mattered. Tala's eyes met his, her expression raw. "I'm not who I was," she said quietly. "The woman I was died with them. Now I'm just trying to survive. And maybe, just maybe, do something good for once." Ethan's heart tightened at her words. He could hear the weight of everything she had lost in her voice. It was a reminder that sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought on the outside, but within, in the quiet moments when you had no one to share your burdens with. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice low. "For what happened. I can't imagine how hard that must be." Tala nodded, her eyes lingering on the fire again. "It's not something you can imagine until you live it." It was a shared silence, as if they both understood that sometimes there were no words that could heal the wounds of the past. They simply had to sit with it, face it together, in whatever way they could. Ethan leaned back against the rock behind him, staring up at the star-filled sky. It was different out here in the desert, quieter, more alive in its own way. He had spent years running from one place to another, never staying long enough to form connections. He had convinced himself that it was better that way, that keeping his distance kept him safe. But as he sat there with Tala, he realized something. Maybe it wasn't the distance that kept him safe. Maybe it was the very thing he'd been avoiding, human connection. Tala's voice broke the silence again. "You've lost something too, haven't you?" she asked, her tone softer now. Ethan hesitated, not sure if he wanted to open that door, but there was something in Tala's gaze that made him want to. Maybe it was the way she shared her own vulnerability, or maybe it was just the way she seemed to understand him in a way no one else had. "I've lost a lot of things," he said quietly, his voice tinged with a sadness he rarely let show. "People, mostly. Friends I thought I could trust, and family I never got to say goodbye. They weren't really there when I needed them most." Tala nodded in understanding, her eyes dark but gentle. "That's the hardest part, isn't it? The goodbyes we never get to say." Ethan didn't answer, but the weight of her words settled deep in his chest. He had carried that pain with him for so long, thinking he could outrun it. But here, with Tala, it felt like maybe he didn't have to. Maybe it was okay to just feel it, without pretending it wasn't there. The fire crackled again, sending a shower of sparks into the night air. Ethan shifted his position, glancing over at Tala. He could see that the past was still a heavy burden on her shoulders. He didn't know how to fix it for her, or even if it could be fixed. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone in his own pain. Tala had carried her own scars for a long time, and while they weren't the same as his, they were real. In that moment, Ethan realized that maybe that was enough, that they didn't have to have all the answers. They just had to keep moving forward. Tala turned her gaze back to him, her eyes searching his for something, though Ethan wasn't sure what it was. Her lips parted as if to speak, but she seemed to think better of it, letting the words settle between them. Instead, she simply nodded, her voice soft but firm. "We can't change the past, Ethan, but we can choose what we do with what we have left." Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. For a long time he had been defined by what he had lost, by the things he couldn't control. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to start choosing what he did with the present, the moments he had now, the connections he was beginning to form. He didn't know where this road would lead, but for the first time in a long time he was starting to believe that it didn't have to be walked alone. The fire burned low, and the desert night grew colder, but Ethan and Tala sat together, silent companions in a world that had been anything but kind to them. But here, in this small corner of the desert, they had found something more important than survival. They had found a fleeting sense of peace. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the desert. The world seemed to awaken in waves, the heat building up again as the sky turned a bright blue. Ethan sat near the small fire, watching as Tala packed up their things, her movements deliberate and efficient. She had been up before dawn, as she always was, and there was a sense of quiet purpose in the way she worked. Ethan stretched, his muscles sore from the long ride, and rubbed his eyes. He hadn't slept well the night before, his thoughts swirling around everything they had shared, and the weight of the quiet moments between them. He had been reflecting on Tala's words, The things she had revealed about her past, about her loss, it had made him think about his own life, his own mistakes and regrets. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection to her now. What started as an unexpected encounter in the desert had turned into something much more meaningful. It wasn't just the bond of survival anymore. There was a deeper understanding between them, unspoken but clear. It was the kind of connection he had longed for but had never found in all his years of wandering. Tala finished packing her bag and glanced over at him, catching his gaze. Her eyes were soft but sharp, as if she was always aware of everything around her. There was no hiding from her, not that he ever wanted to.
"We should get moving," she said, her voice steady and calm.
"The heat will be worse later. We need to make it to the next settlement before nightfall." Ethan nodded, rising to his feet and brushing the sand from his pants. "Right. Let's get going." As they saddled up their horses, the silence between them felt different this morning. It wasn't the awkward silence of strangers, but the kind of quiet shared by two people who had learned to understand each other without words. There was a comfort in it now, a sense of companionship that had been slowly growing over the past few days. He found himself looking forward to the journey ahead, not just because of the destination, but because of her presence beside him. They rode together, side by side, through the desert once more. The sun beat down on them, but this time it didn't feel as harsh. There was something about riding together, about sharing the vastness of the desert that made it feel less empty. They had each other now, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The miles passed, and the world around them seemed to shift. The desert, once a place of endless heat and emptiness, began to feel like a backdrop to their journey. They spoke less now, but the words they shared seemed to hold more weight. Every glance, every small gesture carried meaning. There was no need for grand speeches or forced conversation. They were comfortable with each other in a way that was rare, a quiet understanding that spoke louder than anything else. As they approached a small settlement in the distance, the first signs of civilization appeared. A few scattered buildings, dust hanging in the air, and the faint smell of smoke from a campfire. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Tala's shoulders seemed to relax as they drew closer, and Ethan noticed the subtle change in her demeanor. The tension that had been in her body since their first meeting was beginning to ease. They made their way toward the settlement, the horses moving at a steady pace. As they reached the edge of town, Ethan could see people working, some fixing carts, others repairing buildings, and a few just sitting and talking in the shade. It was a stark contrast to the vast, empty desert, but it felt like a welcome change. Tala dismounted and walked toward one of the buildings, a small hut near the edge of town. Ethan followed her, his curiosity piqued. He wasn't sure what they were looking for here, but he knew it was important to her. She had said she needed to send a signal, and this place seemed to be their best chance. "Stay close," Tala said over her shoulder, her voice low. "I'll handle this." Ethan nodded, watching as she approached a man outside the hut, a weathered figure with a long gray beard. The two exchanged a few words in a language Ethan didn't understand, but the man seemed to nod and gesture for Tala to follow him inside. She glanced back at Ethan, giving him a brief, reassuring nod before disappearing into the hut. Ethan stayed where he was, unsure of what to do. He didn't want to intrude, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. This was it. This was the moment when Tala would contact her people, when everything that had brought them together in this desert would finally come to a head. What would happen next? What would she do once her mission was complete? And where did that leave him? He didn't have the answers, and for a moment he wasn't sure if he even wanted to know. He had spent so much of his life alone, never staying long enough to form any lasting bonds, but now he wasn't so sure. After what seemed like an eternity, Tala emerged from the hut, her expression calm but guarded. She walked back to him, her steps steady and sure. There was something different about her now, something more grounded. "It's done," she said simply. "I've sent the signal. They'll find me." Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him, but it was tempered by something else, something he couldn't quite place. "And then I go. I finish what I started." Ethan's heart sank. He knew this moment would come. She had always said she had a mission, a reason for being here. He had known, deep down, that he couldn't be a part of it. But hearing the words, hearing her say it so matter-of-factly, made it real. She was going to leave. "Are you sure that's what you want?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tala didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, her eyes drifting to the horizon where the desert met the sky. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, like they both knew what the other was thinking, even without saying it. "I don't know," Tala said finally. I think I have to go, but there's something I want to say." Ethan tilted his head, his heart beating faster. He wasn't sure what she was about to say, but it felt like the most important thing he had ever heard. "I'm not good with this kind of thing," Tala said, her voice soft but steady. "But I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything. You didn't have to stay with me, but you did, and that means something." Ethan felt his chest tighten, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone. "Don't mention it," he said with a half smile. "I'd do it again, in a heartbeat." Tala gave him a small, sincere smile, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world had stopped. There was no desert, no mission, no past. Just two people, standing together in the quiet. And in that moment, that was enough. The wind blew softly across the desert, carrying the warmth of the day with it. Ethan and Tala stood side by side, looking out at the horizon. They knew the journey ahead would be different, but they also knew that the time they had spent together had changed them both. As the sun began to set, casting a soft glow over the desert, Ethan made a promise to himself. No matter where this path led, no matter how far they went, he would remember this moment. He would remember Tala not just as the warrior from another world, but as the person who had reminded him that sometimes the most important thing wasn't the destination, but the people you met along the way.